From the Glucksman Library at the University of Limerick, Journalism at UL presents Paul Maguire and Mary Dundon in conversation.
We're very lucky today to have Paul Maguire with us, who is the head of the investigations unit in RTE. Paul is a very experienced journalist. He started working in local radio in Dundon and has been working with the RTE investigations unit for about the past 12 years. Would that be right, Paul? The programme we asked you to look at for today, Profiting from Prostitution, was made by Paul back in 2012, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about that, and we'll give you a chance to ask some questions afterwards. The main thing that I want you to get from this talk is, we all know the story, but I want you to listen to how the story was actually investigated and the difficulties that RTE had in getting people to speak and in getting people on the record, and as well how they were able to use like the database they use that they built up to build the story and get people to speak to them. A lot of the programs that Paul has been involved in have won top international awards, and including this one, I think it was in 2013, it won the New York Festival's International Television and Film Award. Got the silver medal in that. Several other primetime stories, including the one on inside the illegal cigarette trade, the documentary on abuse, and also the one about tyres and slave labour in Ireland, have all received national and international awards. So I'd like you to put your hands together and welcome Paul here. He's going to speak to you first of all, just a little bit about the new investigations unit in RTE, and then about the making of the programme, and then we'll open it up to questions. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Top journalist. I think I'm here under false pretenses. I'm quite happy to, what I was going to plan on doing in talking to Mary was just to kind of give you a brief background to where I kind of came from, and also the RTE investigations unit, which has been up and running in its new form for the last 13 or 14 months. Mary's explained it's quite a relaxed atmosphere here, which suits me down to the ground. I could talk for Ireland, so if you want to ask any questions as we progress through anything about the prostitution programme, anything about the investigations unit, if you have any questions at all, just kind of jump in with the questions and we can kind of pick back up what I was saying earlier if you want. So I'm quite happy to deal with any questions as we go along, more so rather than dealing with them at the end. The RTE Investigations Unit was put in place in December 2012, so we're 13 going on 14 months old. The unit came about after a serious major problems that we had in relation to what's very well known, a case very well known about Father Reynolds. Father Reynolds occurred during the Primetime Investigates, which used to be called the PTIs, the Primetime Investigates strand of programs. That strand of programs ran for a number of years. They produced 56 or 57 programs. Whether you liked them or disliked them or thought they were great or thought they were a load of crap, 56 out of the 57 did have some level of impact, or did bring about some level of change. One of them, the Father Reynolds one, was a total disaster. It was completely wrong. We got it wrong. It should never have happened, and hopefully nothing like that will ever happen again, because we've introduced massive change within the organisation. We've learned a huge amount in how we go about our investigative journalism. We've introduced all new protocols in the way we go about undertaking investigations. Even before an idea even gets off the ground, it has to get over a certain level of bars before an investigation. We can even decide that this is going to be an investigation. And then all the way through the investigative process, there are bars that have to be reached and surpassed at all times before we can move on to the next stage. The investigations unit is different in comparison to the PTIs. PTIs were very much a sister program of the primetime program, and they were born, the investigations were born out of the primetime program. When we did PTIs, they tended to be people who worked on primetime programs, while not exclusively open to primetime staff. 90% or 95% of them were produced by people working on the primetime programs. The investigations unit is much different now than the PTIs, because we are a cross-organisational, multi-platform unit. We provide a service to the rest of RTE. We have skills and expertise that we've built up over a number of years in the whole area of investigative journalism, and we provide that to the organisation and indeed beyond the organisation. Anybody within the organisation can approach the investigations unit with an idea, with a concept, and ask to have this particular story investigated. We'll look at the merits of the story, and also, you know, have we got the facilities and the resources to actually investigate it. And we also work then with external sources. At the moment we have a co-production, a co-investigation, if you like, going on with Danish television, and we also are looking at something with Swedish television as well. We have looked at a couple of stories with some of the newspapers over the past 12 months.
Robert McNamara, how much background research goes into an investigation before you decide to actually take it on, whether it's worthy of investigation?
That varies from story to story. Like, before we decide that there is an investigation that a story is worth investigating, you probably could have anything up to maybe 2 months' work of a reporter or a producer tipping away, if you like, in the background, gathering prima facie evidence of something, you know, that's worth investigating. So it could be any length of time. You don't kind of wake up with an idea in the middle of the night and, you know, have an investigation the next day, or at least very rarely. But you put in a couple of weeks' work into it before you'd even think about approaching the likes of me with the story.
Lisa Blake. When the investigations unit are dealing with quite sensitive cases that they're trying to cover, like for example last Thursday in Fatal Failures, you had a couple talking about how they lost their baby in the hospital. When you're dealing with something that is going to tell such a compelling and powerful story, does it ever happen at the last minute the couple might be reluctant to actually go on air and say, maybe I don't want to go through with this? What do you do in a situation like that if they're reluctant?
Well, if they're reluctant and they say that they are not going on air, you can't really do anything. I mean, if they pull out of it, that's it. They've pulled out of it. We can't. In extreme cases, there is a process that we can go through within RTE, where it has to go to the Director General as part of our protocols, and we would argue that the public interest is very strong in this case, and that while the individual's interest has to be considered and respected, that the public interest outweighs the individual's interest in that case. But what we would do in sensitive cases like that, and Mary and myself were talking about this over lunch, is that there is a phenomenal amount of work that actually goes into human work on a human level, if you like, that goes into last week's story, for example. I mean, I met those families for the very first time at the beginning of last October, and all the way through since last October we've had a team of people working on that with them, and we've literally held their hand every step of the way through that story, and also all of the families actually in that we dealt with them all. We up to and including the point that when we had the programme produced, we brought them to RTE last Wednesday night, and they knew this well in advance, that we brought them to let them see the programme, because the worst thing that could happen to a family who have been traumatised, 3 families that have been traumatised like that, is that you'd expect them to sit down with the rest of the population and watch their story unfold. Some of the things that we kind of forget maybe as journalists is that these are human beings. There are other aspects that people don't kind of maybe think about in the enthusiasm or drive to get a story across the line and be the journalist to break the story. People tend to forget that these are actually human beings who have lost the baby. They are, for example, in the Malloy's case, and maybe even more so in Natasha Molyneux's case, the young girl who lost the baby back in 2008. She was the girl at the end who you saw with the still pictures. They're seeing their story, a 5-year story, or in the Malloy's case, a 2.5-year story, condensed into 45 minutes, very much in your face, and all the wounds and cuts are all opened back up again. The emotion is thrown at them. 2 years is compacted into 45 minutes. So what I'm saying is that we would be very, very sensitive and very careful of dealing with people like that, to the point that we'd bring them in and let them see it. If there was something that they were uncomfortable about or really had a big problem with, we would try and do our best to facilitate changing that, even at a late stage. So it's a case of working with the people so that you don't actually get to the point where they're deciding then that they want to pull out. But if they do, as I say, there is a process there that we can actually look at. But touch wood, so far, in dealing with sensitive issues, we have managed to work with the people all the way along the line. So there are no shocks, there are no surprises, and they're comfortable in their own skins with their story going out.
Well, Diane, by the way, we appreciate it. One of the things we're concentrating in the programme on is, probably at 4th year at master's level, is the use of the Freedom of Information Act. And there's some changes on the way and stuff. Do you have any kind of insights into the use of that at a very practical end within the unit?
No, like we would find, the freedom of information is becoming more and more difficult all the time. I don't have any gems of information. It is getting more difficult. The new changes that have been brought about are causing us extra problems. On top of that, another thing that's, I suppose, diluting the effect of the FOI is the fact that so many government departments are now contracting work out to private organisations and private companies, that when you actually go, you might have been able to get X information in the past from the government department, but now they've contracted that work out, and when you go looking for X again this year, they say, no, sorry, can't give it to you this year because it's actually commercially sensitive. So it's getting, like, the changes that they're making, the fact that they're subcontracting stuff out, it's making it way more difficult. We're, to be honest with you, we are actually struggling all of the time. Over the last 12 months in the investigations unit, we run what we call lunchtime masterclasses, where I get experts to come in and talk to us during, for sessions. We do that once a month, and we've had FOI experts in 2, maybe 3 times.
Great insight in itself, just the tenacity to keep calling.
That is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And if you don't get it, like, again, we would have probably, I'd say at the moment in time, we probably have 3, if not 4, appeals before the Information Commissioner at the moment. That is how you'd crack FOI. It was a lot easier, I remember, when the FOI came out first. We were all using it and we were getting a lot of stuff. The government have got a lot smarter. It's much more difficult to get it. I'd say to you, just keep plugging away, find a different way of wording it, get somebody to help you with it, to reframe the wording on it. There are people out there who, make a career of going up against FOI free decision makers and winning. They're the people to talk to. But if you can get a contact who can tell you, yeah, this information isn't actually all paper, it is stored, digital, and this is what is stored inside in there. So if you can ask, if you can play it smart and know exactly what it is, right down to, you have it in such and such a file, and it's in Excel format, or it's in PDF format, or it's in Microsoft Access format. If you can tell them that it's digitally, then that cuts the cost way down, and they have to kind of give it to you.
You all had a look at the profiting from prostitution programme that Paul worked on, and we wanted you to look at that because he was saying to me that this was a difficult programme to research, and because of the sensitivity, so that you had to use maybe techniques that you didn't use before. And really, a lot of these students here are going to have to write 1,000-word investigative reports themselves. So while they'll be taught in class like about using the FOI, using the Companies Act, you know, getting good sources and all that, you were saying you thought it might be useful if you could talk them through the difficulties that this posed and how you maybe got around it technically.
Sure.
In that.
Yeah, this was a difficult program to do. I mean, prostitution, you know, as they say, like it's as old as the hills. Everybody knew it was going on. In Ireland, if you went back maybe 10 or 15 years ago, prostitution was mainly, there were about, we estimated from the research that we did, maybe about 200 prostitutes working, and they mainly worked on the street corners around Dublin. The internet arrives and you know, it changes everything. Mobile phones arrive and it changes everything. There was a new law introduced which made it, while it didn't deal directly with prostitution, it dealt with prostitution under antisocial behaviour legislation. And that, the big part of that was that it was illegal to sell yourself on the street. It was seen to be antisocial, so it drove prostitution underground, it drove it indoors. We also had, you know, there was just a lot of things that kind of came together. And there's a lot of apartments lying around the place that nobody wants, you know, the property crash left landlords with lots of apartments, so apartments were there to be rented very, very cheaply. While we all knew all of that, we were looking at this whole issue of the fact that we believed people were being trafficked into the country, and that people, if you broaden the definition of trafficking, which organisations like Rohama will do, when we talk about trafficking of women into the country for prostitution, we immediately think of the Rosslare story a number of years ago, where people, you know, died in a container in Rosslare. But trafficking is a lot more subtle than that. If you actually dig down into the definition of trafficking, trafficking is just moving people against their will. So people being moved around the country are actually being trafficked around the country. We had no idea how we were actually going to try and prove this. For years, the Gardaí and the Garda Press Office and the Garda Commissioner's annual report never showed anything to do with trafficking. And if it did, in the latter years, it showed an abysmal amount of cases, like tiny number of cases, like 1 or 2 cases. But stories that I had heard talking to people, individuals, organisations, was that it was a lot more prolific than people knew about. It's very much underground, it's very much indoors, so how would you actually go to try and investigate this? We started to look at the internet, the tools that the pimps and the women were actually using to advertise their services. One of the biggest, very quickly, I'll just kind of give you the thumbnail overview of this. The biggest site is Escort Ireland. On average, there are about 700 people advertising that every day. One of the things we found was that they don't have histories. So if Mary is in Kildare today and she's moved tomorrow somewhere else, you don't see, tomorrow you don't see the fact that she was in Kildare. So there's no kind of history that we could actually track people. So we kind of thought then, how do we actually go about doing this? How do we build up a picture of what's actually going on? I happen to be a database nerd, I just love databases, so I thought, like, if we actually took the information every day of the week, if it meant getting a researcher sitting down and taking all the details for 600 profiles, and we built the database and put them into that, could we start to build a picture? So we got a couple of researchers, and we actually, that is how we physically started doing it. We started taking the information literally down and putting it into fields which mirrored the fields that you would have. So we had the, you know, price for 30 minutes, the mobile phone numbers, their name, their locations, their working times, their favourites, all this kind of stuff. We literally created a mirror image of the Escort Ireland website, and we did that every day for a couple of weeks, and we found then that there were what appeared to be patterns. Obviously we couldn't have people working 24 hours a day just copying all this information down, so we had to get a bit more technical, and we found a backdoor into the Escort Ireland website which allowed us to scrape the site, and in other words pull down all the information. So that became an automated process. And we then pulled all the information down over a period of 3 or 4 months. This was before we kind of did any filming at all. And it got to the point then that we began to see the patterns that, for example, there were women, who were in Ennis one day, and then, next week they appeared to be in Cavan, and there were women that might have been in Christchurch in Dublin who had gone to Ennis. And we started to see all of these patterns, and we kept developing the database all the time, improving it, tweaking it all of the time, and it got to the point then that it was actually spitting out. It was forecasting, it was predicting who was going to actually move where, which then gave us the opportunity to get ahead of these moves that were taking place and to actually set up cameras in the different locations as to where all of these people were going to end up. It also gave us a huge amount of other information. For example, the whole mobile phone thing. SIM cards, for example, are sold in packs of 10. We were able to identify numbers where, say, 001 was in Cork, but 002 was up in Donegal, and 003 was down in Dublin. And the odds of that happening, like according to Vodafone, were kind of like 1,000,000 and something to 1 or something. So there had to be an association with that. And we just built up a huge, vast array of data that we were able to put and extract and interrogate to find all of these patterns. Then it was a case, obviously, when we started filming that, we then started to find the people behind who were running the operations, the Ion Antons of the world. And again, there was a massive surveillance operation put into looking at him and what he was doing. And then we needed to find victims. Again, that was kind of difficult to do. We needed to talk to the women that I was very concerned about, because we had women who had come to us who had put themselves in danger to talk to us about their stories. And I just really felt, on a personal level, I just couldn't leave them hanging out there, that we actually had to do something. So we went and we argued the toss with the Director General, and there was lots of meetings, and the fact that the PTI had been closed down. But I argued and argued and argued, and eventually they allowed us to do it, and we put the programme out. But the legal barriers that we had to get over on that programme, because of the sensitive time that it was, were absolutely enormous. And when you look at a certain individual, and I'm just conscious that this is going out on the web as well too, but when we looked at a certain individual who was identified towards the end of the programme, speaking on a phone in her sitting room, we knew that she was involved in all of this particular agency, but the legal people wouldn't accept what we were trying to say in an earlier version of the script about her, despite the fact that she had been in court and found guilty earlier, a number of years earlier, on prostitution charges. I'm quite happy that they put us, put the gun to her head and said, you've got to go and get more, because we eventually did find a way of actually getting this individual involved in the programme, and that was by filming her on the phone talking to somebody we had put up as an escort looking to work for her agency. What we did originally was that we got one researcher, to put in an ad. We wanted to try and get inside the head of the punter, which was an intricate part of the story. And what we needed to know was, like, what was the punter's attitude to escorts or to buying sex in Ireland or paying for sex in Ireland. So we got one of our researchers to put up a profile on the Escort Ireland and pretend she was selling her body for sex. And we got, I can't remember, it was 70 calls a day. We got 350 calls, I think, in a 5-day period. It was working out at about 70 calls a day. That was the first thing that we did. We knew then that this agency, the Triple X agency, was run by Samantha Hutton, but we just couldn't make the connection. We knew where they were operating out of. We saw the brothels, we were able to film in the brothels, and we were actually able to film the taxi guy taking the money from the women, or at least going into the apartment empty-handed, coming out with a big brown envelope in the shape of notes like that, driving in his taxi from the apartment up to the house where Samantha Hutton lived. We even filmed him going in the door and she wasn't there one day, and he dropped the envelope into the porch, and we filmed all that, but that wasn't good enough for our solicitors. So what we had to do then was think of another way of how we might associate her, And we had heard from talking to a contact who told me that she does interview all of the girls in some shape or form. So we then said, right, if we had a girl who wanted to work for the XXX agency, would there be a possibility that she might interview her and that we could then capture that? And the interview took place on the phone from her front room. And we were sitting outside with the escort beside us in the van, talking into her as we filmed her.
But you knew, like, what I was wondering about in the programme, you know, it just showed, as you said, you had to condense it, it showed your, you know, undercover girl making the call, and then you were outside with the camera. But obviously, you had to set up and timed.
There was,
like,
yeah,
you were there and
had,
you knew when she was going to ring.
This was planned down to,
yeah.
This was planned down to the last second.
Yes,
right?
yeah, I thought
so
that.
what we did was we had a location reasonably close to where she was, and we made the initial calls from there because we needed internet access. We knew we would have to send in photographs of this particular girl and the CV and all this kind of stuff. So we got all that sent in, and then we immediately moved the operation up to outside the house. Because, like, when I talk about massive surveillance and that, I was just explaining to Mary, like, 4 people carried out all of that operation, that surveillance operation, for that whole program over a 6 or 7 month period. We don't have like loads and loads of people at our beck and call. It was myself, a producer, a sound guy, and a cameraman. They were the 4 people, and that's the normal staffing for an investigation like that. But yeah, we had the information, but it was all planned down. Like, it literally was a military operation, yeah, that we would ring at a certain time when we knew she wasn't around, but that there was a possibility she would be around in a couple of hours' time, and that's when the call might actually take place. And then we moved to the second location ready to film.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, like, the amount of planning and time that goes, like, this took about 6 months, but you said you were working on it for 2 years,
yeah.
Right?
That's when, like, somebody asked the question there, like, how much time actually goes in before you commission the investigation. It required, to get to a level, you know, because it's so hidden, it's so underground, it took the 18 months beforehand to get enough evidence to justify that we should put this into, that we should actually commission an investigation into this. So yeah, 18 months of work before we actually started, you know, going out filming and all that. We talked to actually a number of people who we could have used in the program, but some of them were very, very traumatized. And the girl that ended up, she was still a young girl, she was only in her 20s, her early 20s. She was the one that we did actually go and include in the program, because we could have put in 2 or 3 people, but the other 2 or 3 people, I just judged that they weren't in the right place for us to actually include them in the program. We spoke to a number of support organisations around the country who deal with women that have found themselves in prostitution for whatever reason. Some of the organisations deal with women, you know, who come to them because they've been trafficked and have found themselves in prostitution. But what happened in that girl's case was that we were put in contact by one of the organisations with this girl. We had to meet her and build up a relationship with her and talk to her and win her trust over a period of time. And eventually then, when she had a certain level of trust with us and was happy with us, we then moved to do the interview with her. But it was like the question we were talking about a few minutes ago, you know, when you're dealing with sensitive issues, you really have to build a huge amount of trust with the people that you're dealing with, because so many different things can go wrong. And again, not to move away from the girl in the prostitution program, but like for the creche program, just to give you another example, when we discovered these children, in some cases, in the worst case, like this child was being bounced off the floor, we had to do something about that. Now, I can talk to you about the protocols and that. Like, we actually reported it to the HSE, despite the fact that we were still 4 or 5 weeks away from actually broadcasting. But there was the issue of the parents and informing the parents. And what we had to do in advance, and this is like no disrespect to UL or any other journalism college or course or anything like that, you know, there's things you have to do that you never can learn in school. You can only learn by practicing them, by actually gaining the experience of going out and doing them. But there was 3 creches that we identified. and there was a total of about, I think it was about, in the crash that I was dealing with, the one in Malahide, there were 10 families. We had to go out on a Friday night and knock on the doors of those families' houses and say, you don't know me, my name is Paul Maguire, I work for the RTA Investigations Unit, and I'm just about here, I'm here to, and when I'm finished talking to you, I will have turned your world upside down completely. We went out to those houses, met the people, and there was a whole array of emotions that we encountered. I have the height of respect for the team that I work with inside, the people that work with me every day of the week, because they went out there and went way above and beyond the call of duty in the way that they dealt with the families. We went out and we would go into a house, and like the people would break down, husbands were crying, roaring crying. There was one guy who was totally inconsolable, he cried for an hour. You know, the mothers were traumatized by what we were telling them, and we had to sit and kind of hold their hand through that process. It got to the point where in the week before the program went out, I wasn't home maybe before 2:30 or 3 in the morning, because you'd go into a person's house, and we're trying to get to all of these families, and you had to go into their house and sit there, and you couldn't just walk in and say, here, look, here's a 12-minute piece about the crash in Malahide, about the Lynx crash in Malahide. There's your son being bounced off the floor. We're going to put that out on the program on Thursday night. Thanks very much. Good luck. Goodbye, and I'll see you again. You had to sit there and answer all of their questions, and that they had 100 questions. They were as traumatized. I'm not exaggerating. They were actually traumatized. So much so that we had to have numbers for them, like for counsellors and for psychologists, that we gave them the numbers, said, look, if you want to ask questions, we're not qualified to deal with this, here's numbers that you can actually contact the people. But like journalism is, it's not just kind of, you know, go in there and ask the question, run in, get the answer and run back out again and break the story. Like, yeah, there's certain types of journalism, and while I have respect for tabloid newspapers, I know they get a lot of bad press, but they tend very much to do that. It's to kind of go in, smash and grab, get the story, get back out again. But if you want to be a good journalist, if you want to continue in journalism, if you want to get the next story, you know, you've got to deal with this story in the best possible way that you can. You've got to remember that most of the stories, you know, focus around human beings, whether they're good, bad or indifferent, and you've got to treat these people like human beings. I mean, a lot of the stories that I've got come from previous stories that I got, and how I actually handled those. I would have dealt with a lot of medical stories over the years, going back to the Michael Neary story, the caesarean hysterectomies in the Lourdes Hospital, the unnecessary removal of women's wombs. I would have been involved in breaking that story. I would have been involved in the Michael Shine sex abuse story, the symphysiotomy story, and the story last week then. But each of those stories in turn came from the previous story, because people know that I'm not going to go out and do a, you know, smash and grab on their story, that their story is important to them, and that I will, and in turn the investigations unit will try and treat them, you know, with the utmost respect and humanity that you can. And that's something that's really important, and you've got to remember that all of the time. And you can't bottle that and give it to you, but all we can do is tell you that that is what you should be doing. And you know, you'll get an awful lot more out of it if you just listen to people. There's nothing as bad as having a preconceived idea of what this story is, or a pre-printed list of questions. Yeah, of course you need your questions. Like when I'm going out to do an interview now, I will have all my questions. I will know all of the areas that I want to cover. But when I ask the first question, I switch off the asking mode and I switch on the listening mode. And you listen to the answer. There is nothing as irritating for an interviewee and for an audience than to ask a question that the interviewee has already volunteered the answer to you. Like, hi, what's your name? My name is Paul Maguire and I live in Malahide in Dublin. And tell me, Paul, where do you live? I just told you, I live in Malahide in Dublin. And it happens all the time. Even with, you know, you'd hear it on Morning Ireland. And the other thing too I'd say to you as well is, your question should never be longer than the answer. The interview is not about you, it's about the interviewee. There's nothing as bad as the question being 3 times the length of the answer. And as Mary was saying, like, I mean, the greatest question ever is, you know, why? It's simple, it's one word question, but why? You know, oh, we did this in government, why? We did this, you know, whatever it is. Like, you know, they don't have to be long questions. Short questions can be very, very effective. The other thing that I'd say to you as well too, and again, it was an older guy taught me this when I was in radio. People panic a lot of the times, presenters panic an awful lot of the time when there's any kind of silence. You have somebody, maybe, you know, a mother telling you about her daughter going missing, and she's on the phone line talking to you, or she's in the studio talking to you, and you don't have pictures, it's radio. The only thing your audience have is what's coming out through the radio in their house or kitchen or whatever. And the presenter is aware of that all of the time. And there's a bit of a silence as the person is crying, telling their story. And you have this silence for a couple of seconds. And what does the presenter do? He jumps in with the next question. Don't do that. Don't ever be afraid of silence. Silence can be an awful lot more powerful than the words that people are actually saying. So don't ever panic at the silence. Now, if it goes on for about 60 minutes, then you got a problem, all right. But in the short term, no, don't ever panic about silence. Give people the opportunity to tell their story, and always listen to what they're saying. And again, like Mary was saying there, like, I mean, you're talking to people. Even when you talk to people out in the street, keep your ear up, because they might say something. You could be meeting somebody for lunch, and you meet them, you say, how's it going, George, or whatever. George says, look, terrible sorry, Paul, I was late. I bumped into Matty on the way down here. You know, Jesus, Matty's in trouble again. He's always in trouble. And listen, what are we going to order for lunch? You know, why is Matty in trouble? What's Matty always in trouble over? Ask those questions, like, because this person could be your best friend. They could be just mentioning this in passing, but there could be a massive story in Matty always being in trouble. Ask the questions, like, be nosy, and that's where you'll come across. It's the most unexpected places that you will actually find stories. Again, you know, my LMFM days, there was a guy up there in Drogheda where the studio was, and he was a notorious local politician, but he had invited a cult organisation in. Now, nobody knew they were a cult at the time, but he had invited them in to talk to young people about suicide and drugs. And there was a tiny, tiny little, it was like a little death notice, just the size of a death notice, in one of the local newspapers. But I spotted this and I thought to myself, actually, I think that organisation is actually something to do with a cult. And I just looked it up to see what they were, and sure enough it was a cult. But your man didn't realise that they were a cult. But we got him on the next morning and asked him about this and said, oh yeah, you bring them in. Oh yeah, it'd be great for the young people. And you are aware that they are a cult and they're known as a cult? No. But anyway, the point being, this was 3 lines in the bottom left-hand corner of a page in the local newspaper, and we ended up getting a week's programming out of it. The story ran, it got national coverage, it was on RTE, it just, you know, and it's just the ability to spot where the story is. Even if you take any small group of people, your friends, like, you need to talk to people. Like Twitter, Facebook, I'm not opposed to them. I have accounts so I can look and see what other people are doing. I don't really engage with them. Google, of course, yes, I use it as a tool all of the time. But the biggest tool that you can use is your contact book. I would, inside the team, the small team that we have, I'm constantly getting onto them all of the time to ring their contacts. You have your contacts, they're indexed from A to Z, or whatever way you index them, right? You start at A and you phone the first person, whoever it is, and you say, hi Alan, how's it going? Listen, haven't been talking to you for a while, just touching base with you. Anything happening? The last time I was talking to you, you were saying you were going to go up to Croagh Patrick on the pilgrimage or something. How did you get on? And just spend 2 or 3 minutes talking to them. And over a period of 2-3 months, go through your whole contacts book. These are contacts that you have, right? Think about it. They are people that were involved in what you do in journalism, in telling you a story. They were involved in some way in providing you with a bit of information. They were a contributor, an interviewee. You're not coming to them brand new. They're not a total stranger that are out there, you know, that you've never met before and that doesn't know what you do for a living. You're halfway, you're almost halfway there with them. You make the calls to them, just touch base with them. I mean, that's exactly where the story last week came from. I was doing a ring around. Even now, though I'm not actually doing stories myself, I still would do a ring around to all of the contacts. I touch base with them, drop in, have a cup of coffee with them. Like, I'm always encouraging our people inside the office to go out. Don't come into the office in the morning. Go and have a cup of coffee, have your coffee break with Joe Murphy, or your local TD or whoever it is, just go down and talk to them. They mightn't have a story now, they mightn't have a story next month, they mightn't have a story in a year's time. But in 2 years' time, when they do have a story, they remember that you bought them a cup of coffee and that you're looking for it. And if you combine that with how you treat people when you are dealing with them, when you are interacting, you know, people will come back to you, because if they're a contact for you, they're more than likely a contact in some other journalist's book. But if you've done, you know, if you've done the story properly and you've dealt with them correctly and you've followed all of the guidelines and you haven't screwed them over, and they have a story, it's you that they will actually come back to and talk to you. I can't underestimate it. I can't understate rather the importance of your contacts. Google is brilliant. Look, it's made our lives so much easier. But you know, how many stories are you actually? How many real, good, strong Portlaoise hospital type stories are you going to get off Google? In my experience, very, very few. How many will you get from reading your local contact? I could go back through my last 10 investigations, and all of them came from like either spotting something or being in touch with contacts all the time. Really and truly, you know, cultivate your contacts, keep in touch with them, and as I say, you're halfway there, because they are contacts. You're not just taking the phone book and going from A to a Z and introducing yourself for the very first time.
I think we'll throw it open now to questions. Paul, yeah?
Yeah, you were touching on the human and social kind of dimension of journalism over the last 20 minutes or so. Just with regard to the African woman you were referring to, the prostitution.
Yep. Sorry, I forgot about her. I wandered off.
Yeah.
But you know, you were saying how you were kind of frustrated initially trying to get it off the ground, as well as the various kind of red tape scenarios that you came across. Where does the story kind of end for you and your colleagues? As in, you know, you finished the documentary and went on to air. Where does it go from there? Are you done, or do you pursue it further, or keep an eye on it?
The honest answer is that in 90% of the cases, we, you know, constantly saying this all of the time, we'd come to a subject that we'd know very, very little about. You have to become an expert in a very short period of time on that issue. You do the story, you maybe, in a lot of these long format investigations like the prostitution, it actually takes over, for the last 6 or 7 months of your life, it takes over your life, it becomes 24/7, literally 24/7, and then you put the story out. The prostitution one is a slightly unusual one, but in most cases you tell the story. If there's a follow-up on it, you follow up on it for the next few days. Again, if you've built a relationship with your contacts, they will, like, we're following up on something now out of Portlaoise that's literally just come to our attention in the last 24 hours. So we're following up on that. But there will come a point where we have done our bit, like we've told that story, and you know, there isn't very much more to do with it.
Okay, we'll try and get everybody. If you can try and keep it brief, Barry, yeah?
Yeah, Barry Murphy. You were discussing earlier stories with very sensitive interviewees and sometimes they're traumatised. Have you ever found that somebody maybe in the investigations unit or someone else, you know, from investigative journalism, sometimes composing the story has taken a toll on them, and maybe when they wrap the story, they have to either speak to someone or take some time off?
That is, that happens quite a lot. Well, sorry, no, I won't say that that's not what happens. Yeah, people are affected by stories. We would have precautions in place all the time. It happens actually, it can happen with anybody. Like, I would have been personally very affected by last week's stuff, and I was very heavily involved in that story from the beginning and right through to the end. And when I wasn't there when the interviews were done. Aoife Hegarty, the reporter, did the interviews, and she did an excellent job on it. She would be somebody now who would have the skill of listening as opposed to just barreling through the answers. But when I sat in the edit suite and saw those interviews, like, I was very upset by that, because it was, you know, we were telling it in a way that people like me who have children I can feel that, you know, I can empathise with those people very easily. But yes, to answer your question, staff, workers, colleagues can become traumatised. Particularly, we have to pay particular attention and care to undercover workers when they come out from whatever the undercover job is that they're doing. They have to get a lot of help and support, and we would go to the ends of the earth to ensure that people do get it. And again, like, even if it's not undercover, if somebody's affected by a story, yeah, and as somebody that's in charge of the unit, that is something that I'd always be very, very conscious of and try to keep an eye on. Yeah, you have to watch that.
Good, okay. What's your name?
Ryan Lachlan. I
Yep.
was wondering, what's your motivation? Because you're obviously continuing in with danger or things that are heartbreaking. You know, what makes you want to do what you do? Because you're obviously passionate about it.
I just love talking to people. I came from a completely different background. I started in working in Superquin when I left education, and I started off there. But I just love talking to people, and I love telling stories, and I just absolutely hate injustice. That's probably I know it might sound kind of stupid, but I actually do. If I see injustice, it just drives me around the twist, and I just want to kind of expose people that are trying to cover up things, that are doing things wrong or badly, or where people are victims and they're not getting their voice heard. That's just what motivates me to tell people, to get the stories out.
Very good. Shane, yeah.
Shane O'Riordan. Have you ever questioned your own or your team's journalistic ethics when gathering information during an investigation?
All the time, yeah. We would sit down and we would work out at the very beginning, is this story, ethically correct to do this story? How are we going to get the story? And we look at the ways that we would do it. Is it right to secretly film a person? Like all of those protocols that I talked about earlier. Not only do I question my team, I get my team to question themselves, I then question the team, and then my boss questions me, all the way up to the DG. I mean, that's what I was saying about the secret filming, for example. Like, to go secretly filming, particularly in certain circumstances, it is an invasion of privacy, but we're doing it because there is a public interest argument to doing this. But we must justify that we have reached or passed the bar on the public interest argument. So yeah, you're constantly questioning it all of the time. And there would be certain people that I would work with and have worked with in the past who would be very enthusiastic to kind of switch on a camera, from day one and go out there. And you just tell them, no, we haven't got to the point where we are in a position that we can justify doing that.
Okay, just up at your hands again. I'll take people who haven't asked questions. Lillian, and then Philippa, yeah. Okay, we go around this way. Yeah.
Lillian Fontabo. Certain cultures have a huge, certain backgrounds have a huge culture of silence towards the media. When trust fails, what do you do?
After trust has failed, if we were dealing with somebody who came from a culture that tended to be silent towards the media, that's a really difficult one. I mean, we would try to do is we would try to work with, if say for example we were trying to deal with somebody to get a story from somebody who came from a culture where they didn't really interact with the media, or that they viewed the media as being part of the system, if you like.
Brennan, I was just wondering, how do you know when to stop? If you're in an investigation, you said at the start you have no timelines. So how do you know when you have enough, or when, if you hide in the bush for another 2 weeks, will you get something extra?
My boss is always asking me that. When are you going to stop? You come to a point, I think, where you know yourself that you've gotten as much out of this story that you're going to get. The Portlaoise story, for example, last week. We would know that there are other cases of other people out there who their cases will have to be examined. There could be issues arising in the future for those people. If we had gone on for another 4 months, would we have managed to get those people? There's probably a good chance that we would have. But we felt that we had enough evidence in the story that we had that we were able to prove it wasn't a once-off, because there was a case, there was a previous case, and hey, there was a previous case, and guess what, hey, there was a previous case to that. So nobody could turn around and say, look, sorry, RTA Investigations Unit, it was a once-off thing. We were able to prove there was a pattern. Once you can kind of prove there's a pattern, then I think you've got to start thinking about getting your story out. Yeah, we could have got another 2 or 3 people, I'm sure. Would it have made the story any stronger? I'm not too sure it might have, actually, because I think the story in the 4 people that we had, and the range and variety of the stories was strong and powerful enough. So there is a kind of a natural end to an investigation.
Peter Lee,
Does it ever get to the point where a story is just too big or too complicated and you have to just maybe even abandon, but like just...
Yeah, we would have a couple of stories parked at the moment that, again, like you need certain expertise. If you look at, say for example, Primetime or Primetime Investigates, or even the investigation unit, we would have a massive level of experience in dealing with crime stories, just to take one genre if you like, and we would have a lot of expertise about how to deal with those. Financial stories, we are not as strong. We don't have the expertise. We are working, I've identified that as being an area that we do actually need to get into, and we need to get more expertise, and we need to get more people working in the unit who can investigate right down to the last kind of halfpenny of a story, how to get to that story. So yeah, there would be certain types of story that you would be restricted in because they are so big, we just don't have the resources to do it. What you try to do is you try to break that down into smaller bites or chunks, and you try to work your way through those. And there would be other stories that we just don't have the expertise in. If we can't get up to speed very quickly, well then we need to kind of go out and maybe get external expertise to help us. So yeah, there will be stories we just can't get to.
Judith, yeah.
And going back to the prostitution story, there's a number of times during the secret filming that it looks like Ian Anton is looking straight at the camera. How did you make sure that he didn't figure out that you were filming him? Did you have to change cars or people?
There'd be certain things that I just kind of can't go into, but we would ensure, yeah, I mean, people do that, particularly individuals involved in crime. Like if we're carrying out surveillance on certain individuals, you'll see them drive up to a roundabout, and they'll drive around the roundabout and around and around and around, and then they'll drive off in the same direction that they were going or whatever. In that particular case, yes, he does look into the camera 3 or 4 times. No, he didn't know there was a camera there, and yes, we would take massive precautions, not only to ensure we get the shot, but also to protect the staff who are filming in those circumstances. But no, he didn't know that he was being filmed. But you would take lots of different precautions, yeah.
Yeah.
Luke Hogg, just when you're doing investigations, is there ever, particularly with the prostitution and cigarettes, when you're finished, do you always hand over the information to the Gardaí? Or
no, we never hand over the information to I qualify that. We never hand over the information. We have a principle. We are not an arm of the state. We are not the second Gardaí. We are not the second Revenue Commissioners. We do not hand information over to the Gardaí. On the other hand, the Gardaí have the authority and the power to go to the courts and get a court order and demand that we hand over. And it's only on the foot of a court order that we would hand over information. But yeah, five programs that I've been involved in have been the subject of court orders where they've taken the information that we've gathered. But we never hand over the information. It has to be on the basis of a court order and done through our legal department.
Elaine Tubridy. I was just wondering, did you ever make...
It's an odd name.
Yeah.
Tubridy, yeah.
Did you ever make like a major mistake in an investigation that you learned a good lesson from?
Well, obviously, there's the big one that we did as
Well,
an organisation. Yeah. But personally, I'm sure there were mistakes. Yeah, I mean, there would be mistakes. I couldn't say there's a big mistake that I've learned, but yeah, I mean, I learned something from every single even like last week's programme, there are things that I would have learned from last week's programme. I mean, there are things that you look back at the programme and you'd say, should have done that slightly different or whatever. But I tried to avoid the big mistakes as much as possible, as much as you can. And I have nothing to hide, so I mean, being completely honest with you, I just can't think of a big mistake that I've made. But yeah, there were loads of small things that you kind of say, God, I should have spent an extra day doing that, or I should have maybe got an extra shot of that, or could we have got a bit more information about this to make this. Yeah, there'd be things that we weren't able to include in the programme because we either ran out of time or ran out of steam in trying to get that extra little bit of evidence that we needed to get it over the line, to get that particular aspect in the programme. But we did get the programme out, if you know what I mean.
Lisa Blake, how do you deal with competition? Has it ever happened that you've been scooped on a story, and if so, how did you deal with it?
At the time we were doing the prostitution programme, TV3, coincidentally, were doing exactly the same programme. We just went ahead and continued, and it ended up then, I think they put their program back by about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Obviously, keeping things confidential is a massive problem for us, and you know, we have to keep things very much under wraps all of the time. There is a story that we're working on at the moment. It's kind of been in and out of the news a bit over a period of time. It is a national kind of a story, and it's one that's of interest to, you know, anytime something happens, it's of interest. But it's just that I'm confident when we do our version of that story, it will be the definitive version of the story, and we will have stuff that nobody else would have even thought about getting. And that justifies us doing it, even though the story may have been in or out of the papers over a period of time.
You obviously get a thrill from your work and what you do on a day-to-day basis. But when something comes to an end, how do you either celebrate or let go? Or, I mean, it obviously, if you've been working on something for a long time, it obviously has a grasp on you and everything in your own life, your personal life as well, I'm sure. So how do you kind of move on, let go, or celebrate? Is my question.
Okay. Do we go out on the beer? Is that what you mean?
Well, what would you do? Do you have a tradition or?
No, normally what we try and do is get the crew that has worked on, like there's a big team obviously, while we are a small unit, like you have other people that, you'd see the list of credits at the end of the programme. I mean, we'd have very dedicated video editors who would work all of the time with us. You know, they don't get the front of camera praise or anything like that, but they do a tremendous job. You've got guys who do dubbing and all that kind of stuff. What we try and do, it's like this, I suppose, two answers to your question. On a personal level, you do come, you know, to a crashing halt all of a sudden. You're working, literally 23 hours a day. The program goes out. There's a bit on Morning Ireland. There might be, in the case of last week, it's kind of rolled on over the weekend. But you've done your job and that's it. And you come to a, you know, crashing halt. That is difficult because you find that you haven't been sick for 6 months and suddenly you get flus and colds and everything like that because your body is saying now you can relax. You've also kind of got to wind yourself down mentally as well. It used to take me about 2 weeks or 3 weeks to actually unwind. And in RTE you don't get paid overtime, you accrue toil, time off in lieu. So you'd have quite a lot of time off after that. So you take a few weeks off and try and recover. And then, you know, you've already got a story. Like you've got, normally I would have had 3 stories on the go, 3 big investigations on the go. You have the one that you're working on, you're working to, you know, possibly we need to get this out in the next 2 months. You've one that you have made contact with individuals, you know there's a story, it has been commissioned as an investigation and it's probably going to go out in maybe 9 months' time. And then you have the next one, which is just a concept for your next story, and you're making initial calls to contacts or organisations to suss out, can you get that prima facie evidence which would justify having an investigation. So you're into that pretty quickly, even though you are trying to recover from the past one. Now it's kind of slightly different because while I'm involved in each of the investigations, I'm not the reporter or the producer on it. So like Thursday came, Thursday went, Friday morning I was meeting the next team about the next piece that's going out, so you kind of don't get as much chance to unwind in the job that I'm doing now.
Just in prostitution, the African girl, you built up a relationship with her and everything, but after the show was aired, her life, her situation could have been in danger because of the information she'd given and all that. How did you make sure nothing happened to her and she was protected after that?
We had her in, as I said, we contacted her in conjunction with an organisation which was providing her with a lot of support. That girl looks absolutely nowhere near like the girl that's on the screen. She was wearing a wig, she was wearing frumpy clothes. We disguised her, like you would not recognise her in real life, and we also altered her voice as well too. So we would be very conscious of that, and we would ensure that there were supports there for people afterwards. I mean, I cited the example of the CRECH programme where we ensured that there were people there to answer questions for any of the parents that were involved.
Linda Patutsky, I was just wondering, did you ever feel like your life was in danger or that it was compromised as a result of your investigation?
I would have to take certain precautions, yeah. And there was 1 or 2 occasions where, yeah, myself saying a cameraman found ourselves in a very dangerous situation and like been arrested a few times in foreign countries as well. So, yeah, but you would you would be conscious. I would be. I don't think I'm going to walk out here and be shot in the car park or anything like that. But you wouldn't be stupid. I mean, you would have to be conscious that if you're watching other people can be watching you as well too. So you just don't do stupid things.
And Jean Munsey, I'm just wondering, like, say you have a few ideas for a programme and there's something that you really feel there's a matter of urgency in producing it. Would you go with that, or do you kind of go with, how do you make a decision on that?
It depends what you mean by a matter of urgency. I mean, if it was a case, say for example, that people's lives were in danger, and the story, maybe I'm interpreting what you're saying, Mom, but
creche, or where the kids were.
Where the kids were at risk. Yeah, what we did there was, again, we had protocols in place, and we had that if we said in advance that the protection of the child in this program takes priority over everything else. Even if we're down to the wire and we've put in a huge amount of time, effort and money into this, if there is an issue in relation to child care, child safety, child protection, that takes priority over everything else. When we witnessed we had experts working with us who were constantly monitoring any of the footage that we recorded. If there was any event, we contacted them and asked them for their input into it. And when the most serious event occurred in each of the creches, we immediately got the researchers to lodge a complaint with the HSE to highlight, and we gave a detailed complaint of everything that we had witnessed in that. Gave phone numbers, names, phone numbers, and we pursued it with the HSE. So yeah, there are certain things bigger than telling the story.
Well, I was just wondering, have you ever rejected a story where you see that it might turn up somewhere later on?
Yeah, there'd be stories that, like, you'd have maybe an ongoing list of stories. You'd never really reject the story. If it had any kind of merit at all, you'd never reject it. But there are stories, we're only a small number of people working in the unit. I think at the moment we've about 12 and kind of 2 people that move in and out. So we've only 12 people. We can only do a certain amount of stories. We have to prioritise what the important ones are. And you might have a story you say, Jesus, I'd love to do that tomorrow morning. I'll have to leave it on the list until the next story that goes out, and then the crew or team from that can then move on to this story. And you might find it pops up in the Irish Independent or on TV3. It's just life. You have to kind of get on it.
Well, listen, thank you very much. It's been really enlightening. Just hearing your experience, especially for the students firsthand, how things actually work on the ground, Paul. I'd like you all to give Paul a round of applause.